Boom, there you go. All right, now officially I am live. So I am going to have to do this kind of in a weird way. Good evening, and welcome to Tripping on Legends Live. My name is Christopher Balzano. Welcome to the show. There are a lot of weird and interesting things kind of going on right now. Facebook has kind of changed their setup a little bit. So I am I am trying to navigate all of that. So it looks a lot different than it used to look. So I'm hoping that everything is going well. While I'm doing it, I'm also streaming this live on Instagram. So if you are not on the Facebook page and you're not getting the Facebook lives when we go live every weekend, remember that the Facebook is www.facebook.com/trippingonlegends. And the Instagram is Spooky Balzano. For right now, it's Spooky Balzano. I put out a poll earlier this week. For my normal viewers, you'll notice I am not drinking from my Robert the Doll. I've been having an absolutely horrible, horrible time sleeping. So I've gone through a lot of coffee. So this is a fresh coffee cup. I am not with my normal Robert the Doll coffee tonight. If you've been following the social media, you'll know that this week I put out a poll asking whether there were two different ideas that I had over what we could be talking about tonight. As you know, I like to do my live shows about a topic, and then our recorded shows are about an actual legend trip. I'm here by myself tonight, and I'm navigating 16 different medias, so we're going to try to make it work. Overwhelmingly, overwhelmingly, people said that they wanted to go with what tonight's topic is, which is ghost lights, and the function that they play in the paranormal, what they are, some ghostly legends attached to them, and kind of go from there. They are one of the probably most common aspects of the paranormal. But before we get into that, after I do my little intro spiel, I would love to hear your versions of ghost light stories in your town or legends that you know of. And then phone number is 813-418-6822. So just before I get going, really funny story, or not that funny, actually. I am a teacher, as most of you guys know, and I've been doing remote learning and all that kind of good stuff. Or distance learning. And I had put up my Google number as a way for parents and students to contact me. But I guess I put the wrong number down. I won't tell you the number that I actually put, but it was very, very close. But I put the wrong number down, and this guy in Tampa was getting, let's just say, flooded with calls from parents and calls from students, especially after I had a little snafu with some of my technology yesterday. And some April Fool's stuff got into the mix of my Zoom classroom. And so this guy from Tampa actually had to call my school and say, can you tell the guy to change his number? Because I keep getting calls all day long. So the actual number is 813-418-6822. So make sure that you are calling in to kind of give your version of the stories. But I'm going to do my little intro first before you guys do. I guess I want to start off by setting some parameters for what this is. So having written up a book, hey Richard and hey Jeff, having written a book on how to take ghost pictures, one of the things that you come up against constantly in the paranormal is the idea of an orb, right? What are these orbs, orb photography, all that kind of stuff. Some people think that they are the end-all be-all of the paranormal. Other people absolutely hate them because they can be easily explained. That's not what a ghost light is. To define for our discussion tonight what a ghost light is, I want us to think of these visible with the human eye, balls of light that are seen in locations where the reason for it is some kind of ghostly background, right? Almost every single haunted legend I've tracked down at some time or another gets into this idea of ghost lights, right? This idea that, um, in addition to whatever else might be going on, people also see these glowing balls of light. Okay, that can kind of be part of the discussion tonight. But the primary thing are hauntings or haunted legends where that light is the primary source of the haunting. It's the majority of what people are discussing when they talk about the actual haunting. Now, the first thing, I'm going to get it right out there, because I think it's an important part of the discussion, is the idea that this is something natural. And I agree. I agree that many times this whole idea of ghost lights and these locations where ghost lights happen can be completely explained away by some kind of natural phenomenon. Now, I am going to do the best I can to explain the science. If you know me, you know not only do I kind of brush my nose up at science, sorry, Jeff, but I also, and Richard too, but I also think that the scientific explanation doesn't necessarily make as much sense as people think it does. It sounds really good, but I don't think it does. And what people say it is swamp gas, which rises to the surface or rises to the air and is rapidly ignited, causing a burst of light. So in other words, it's completely explainable. And if you look at a lot of the classic ghost light legends that people spread, they are in areas that are swampy, or cemeteries, which people say are, all of that, all of that good natural stuff biodegrading and bursting up into the air. And of course, for years and years and years, things like St. Elmo's Fire have been part of sailor lore. But I'm not sold. I'm not sold that that's entirely the reason for it, and this is the reason why. And if there is someone out there who can argue with me on this, I would completely encourage you to either call or post later or post in the comments or whatever this kind of argument that this is the majority of them are this, because I don't think even the majority are. That kind of natural phenomenon, does it occur, right? Have we been able to actually observe this, or is this something theoretical, right? Have we actually been able to go to these locations and observe that ignition and prove that that's what it is? There might be a completely scientific reason for it, but that doesn't mean that's what's going on, right? So what I would like to know from scientists or what have you, have we been able to recreate this swamp gas explosion in a lab? I honestly don't know that. I tried to research it today, but it was a pretty hectic day. I don't think that it has. And even if it has, and it can explain some of them, the nature of these balls of light, the nature of these ghost lights, defy that kind of reasoning for two reasons. One, oftentimes these balls of light don't explode. They're not bursting, but rather they're actually following people. Like they follow cars, they follow people, people can observe them. And the second part of it is they happen frequently, right? So if we take two cases that I'm going to talk about tonight, what I'm only going to talk about a little bit because it's hopefully a legend trip. I'm going to be able to go on practicing responsible social distancing tomorrow. One is in Frostproof, Florida, and the one in Frostproof is they always say about it, it's really good if it's dry. If it's dry, it happens. If it's not dry, then it's not going to happen. And the other one that I'm just thinking off the top of my head with this kind of explanation to it would be probably the most popular one in Florida, if not maybe even in the country, which is the Oviedo Lights. And the Oviedo Lights has the same kind of thing. It happens best when it is warm out. It happens best when it is like, it happens in the dry months. It happens at a certain time at night. All of those things, when you start putting conditions on when a haunting can happen and when a haunting legend plays itself out, what you're starting to do is say conditions have to be right. If conditions have to be right, then all of a sudden you're pointing at something natural, right? Or more likely pointing at something natural. But the problem is that places like the Oviedo Lights, places like the frost-proof ones, places, I'm also going to talk about the mini lights tonight. All of these things happen frequently enough that as far as science goes, science should be able to go out there and do it, right? Science should be able to go out there and experiment and actually prove this thing right. And the problem is that these things happen so frequently that it would be crazy to think that things are exploding in the air all the time and we can't capture that explosion, right? So even though the science sounds completely legitimate, I think it fails, as science often does in these cases. I think it fails because while it offers you a comforting explanation, it doesn't actually explain anything of what's going on, or it doesn't have a reason for those variables to be in place. The most interesting aspect, I think, of these ghost sites is that, now here's where you have to separate the investigator parts of the paranormal and the legend tripping parts of the paranormal. Yes, I'm touching my face, but I'm okay. These ghost lights are often the connector of a community. They're often something that is passed down from generation to generation. They are the most active and the most interactive type of legend trip that there is. So if you're a follower of the show or whatever, if you think of all the things that you've seen us go out there and do, right, over however long, not a lot of people going out there and doing it, right? Not a lot of people going out there saying, let's do a spell at this bridge, or let's throw celery off this bridge at midnight, or whatever it might be. Like those kinds of things, people who are really, really into this will do that. Ghost lights are something completely different. Ghost lights are something that people actually plan to go out into. So I'm going to bring up the first case, which is probably my favorite case, which is the case of the Oviedo Lights. So Oviedo is a community that is right outside of Orlando, right outside Orlando. For years, and this is actually one of the chapters in Haunted Love. For years, people have gone out and watched the Oviedo Lights. And depending on when you go, depending on what decade you're in, what these Oviedo Lights physically look like changes. So they are balls of light, big, and that's kind of one of the other defining features. They're not these little orbs that you see in pictures, but they're these big balls of light. And they are seen dancing. They're seen rising from the sides of the road, which are swamps, playing with each other, floating in and out of each other. They've been seen as green, white, orange. They've been known to follow cars. At least one story is out there that the ball of light itself turns into a motorcycle. That's kind of a new one. And the interesting thing is, these lights really first started to be seen in the 30s and 40s. By the 60s, this was an event, right? So unlike other weird hauntings, this is an event. People would actually take their dates. Talk about a cheap date, right? They'd take their dates to go see the Oviedo Lights. Carloads of kids would go. Parents would go with their children. All of these people would go, turn off all their lights, and see if they could see these dancing lights. And it happened often enough that if you start looking, you will find tons of people who have seen these lights, right? Like tons of people who say, and their memories is always a little bit of this of what actually happened when they saw the lights, and a whole bunch of the event of going out there to see them. This is the very definition. It arises with the term legend tripping, right? Going out to see these lights. It is the most popular one. This was such a big deal that the college, which is now UCF, actually had advertisements in its paper about come see the Oviedo Lights. The physics department is going to see the Oviedo Lights. The art department is scheduling a trip to go see the Oviedo Lights. All of these different things in the paper, right? So if you can imagine, this is before any kind of electronic media. Like there would be a bulletin board of events going on, and you would actually have tagged in there, this department is going to go see the Oviedo Lights. If you would like to join them, please sign up. I was able to contact someone who had written for the paper that back in the day, and she was actually able to confirm that the physics department, this was a fun part of my summer. The physics department actually held a meeting where they discussed potentially what the Oviedo Lights could be, and then of course whether or not they would go and investigate it, whether they would take it seriously. And overwhelmingly in this science department's meetings, in their department meetings, they discussed this haunting as well as whether it was legitimate, and they were open up to looking into it in a very serious way. I tried so hard over the summer to get the notes of this meeting, right? So I tried tracking down a department meeting that happened like 50 years ago. Spoilers, I couldn't find it. As generations change, the backstory for what these ghost lights were changed as well. So all hauntings are a representation of the life and times during which they happen, right? So for the longest time, it began as it was something Native American, because there's a deep tradition in Oviedo of the desecration of Native American mounds in and around the area, and specifically the road going in. Then there was a specific story about a Native American who had been killed by a Spaniard, and the story changes who it is, but a Spaniard on that stretch of road, and he's still walking that road, trying to find some kind of peace, trying to get home again. As generations changed, it then became, it was a man, here's where haunted love comes in. It was a man who had come back from World War II to find the woman that he loved had fallen in love with another man and gotten married. And so he went to the bridge that goes over the river, right at that stretch of road, Snow something road, it's killing me, Snowbird Road, I believe it's called, Snow Hill Road, and killed himself on the bridge, hung himself from the bridge. And now his spirit is there. Well, all of those stories don't account for there being more than one, right? So, mythology has to change based on what people are observing. So now it is a car of kids got killed joyriding on the road. Or, and this is one that's probably the most popular because it allows people to become part of legends, which is one of these things that if you track almost all of these ghost light legends, they all have this twist where this happened. Many of them have this twist where this happens. At least this strain of them. The Oviedo Lights, you got your date, you went out, you saw the Oviedo Lights, you got a little spooked out, you curled up close together. nature takes its course. Just, I am not really sick. There we go. The Oviedo Lights killed lovers, right? This became a spot where people would go and they would make out, they would have sex, and the Oviedo Lights actually destroyed the car or somehow interrupted their sex and killed them, and now they are part of the ghost lights as well. So imagine taking a girl up for a quick, whatever, and now being trapped in that spot forever because you committed a sin. So all of a sudden you start to see this natural phenomenon take on that teaching lesson of folklore of, just don't be parking in cars and having sex when you're not married and all this. It's kind of like, you take a ghost light legend, you mix it with a hook legend, and there you go. And the interesting thing is, the more people went out there to observe the Oviedo Lights, the more the lore grew, because then it was, oh, what happened to the last people who came here? They got killed. And then you take all of the traditional car death legends, the boyfriend who goes out and you hear the scraping on the ceiling of the car. Or, the whole idea of the something happens and the man goes away and he's never seen again. And then his ghost is seen all these things attach themselves to that. Now, this skyrocketed until in the late 60s, early 70s. I believe it might have been 1969 or 1972. Both those dates are kind of popping off in my head right now. Some people who were there to observe the lights, they say they were there to observe the lights, or the news reports say, turned off their lights to get a better look, and weren't seen by an oncoming car. They crashed and they died. This is a real accident that happened there. And the popularity of the Oviedo Lights went dramatically downhill. So it's interesting because it's one of those things where an actual event that you can back up has no folklore attached to it. Yet all these other murders or deaths, murders and deaths, which don't have anything to back them up, kind of have that mythology develop around them. So the real one people stay away from, but the one that's fake, they love that one and they tell it. So, and the Oviedo Lights in the late 80s, 90s, and then of course today even still has kind of had a resurgence. It's been published in books all the time. We went there. We did not see anything while we were there. And it's kind of like almost we forget because of the experiences that we had after that in the early mornings at Stetson. The idea of what had happened and us going to the Oviedo Lights gets kind of overshown and forgotten. But it was there. It was a creepy place. You could totally see how this stretch of road. But the other idea is this, and here's where it kind of comes into play. I lived in rural New Hampshire. I live in nowhere, Florida. I've been on tons of legend trips, tons of haunted adventures up north, and then down here. I've seen a lot of lonely stretches of road. I've seen a lot of places that are set up to be haunted, that look like they could be haunted, that's supposed to be haunted, that we always talk about. No stories there. So there has to be some kind of natural phenomenon that's actually happening there for us to latch onto it, right? So those two things have to exist. It can't just be that a stretch of road has something creepy going on in it. It has to have something that people are experiencing that they then fall back on those legends to explain it. So that's the Oviedo Lights. You guys can feel free to call in, hint, hint, if I've got anyone who's looking to call in. You can call in 813-418-6822 with your kind of extension of this conversation, or at least your the ghost light story that kind of rocks your area, right? The one that they tell in your town. This really falls into three different kinds of stories for the ghost lights. And of course, there's dozens of ones, but they really fall into four big categories. The first big category is the conductor, right? So not only are all hauntings a representation of the life and times during which they happen, but they're also a representation of where they happen. If there is a ghost light that appears, and it appears anywhere near a train or tracks or where there used to be tracks. The weird thing is we don't realize when you start to look into old history of your town. I can't speak about the Midwest. I can speak about the North, and I can definitely speak about the South. The story of most small towns here in Florida, especially, is the story of railroads, right? Everything from this town is Smith, which we're working on, to even some place like Port Charlotte, Punta Gorda, to Fort Myers, to Miami, even. Oftentimes, the stories of the towns between those big places, between those metropolis, is a plural of metropolis, metropoli, is the story of railroads. It's a story of transportation, right? So if there's water nearby, it's a river story. If there are train tracks nearby, or if a train went by, the town was built around these ways to travel. The conductor is probably the most easily gone to one because it makes the most sense, right? So we can talk about love stories. We can talk about Romeo and Juliet situations and lovers' leaps causing ghost lights. We can talk about other aspects of it that I'll get into. But the conductor makes the most sense because if a train was nearby, they were so dangerous that it makes sense to us that someone working for the train station died. And they died because they were hit by a train or something bad happened. And we love our ghosts to have a reason to exist. And one of those reasons, if we take love out of the equation, one of those reasons is unfinished business. And so, as an extension of that unfinished business, it's work that still has to be done. There's something romantic, not romantic, but something romantic, something very spiritual about the idea that someone is continuing to go to their job day after day, even in death. And so it makes sense to us, this first category of ghost lights is the conductor who died near the train tracks, and they're still walking that train track, making sure that everything is okay. They're still doing their duty. Now, obviously a conductor, I call it the conductor, but conductors aren't the ones that are making the train safer like that. But that's it's odd that it always says, almost always in legend, it says the conductor, but that's not what a conductor does, right? Holding a lantern. And that lantern, that's your ghost light right there. So I'm thinking, if I'm not mistaken, and I'm sure I can see that I've got several Massachusetts people here, even in North Adams / Florida, what's it, the Hoosac Tunnel? I'm totally pronouncing it wrong. That's got a conductor ghost light story attached to it, right? So someone, and that makes total sense that someone would die because there have been deaths in there, right? And that conductor is still holding the light, the lantern. I'm not sure. I know I've got some people who said they were going to call in tonight. And I know, once again, I'm going to get this one totally wrong. You realize some of the times I'm talking about stories and legends that I heard 15 years ago. But is it the Ramtail Factory? Doesn't the Ramtail Factory also have, I don't think it's a train conductor, but it's a very similar thing of someone with a lantern going back and forth, still checking on things that need to get done. That's kind of the first category. it's interesting because this one that I'm looking into in Frostproof is there's no explanation for it in the initial story. People just say they used to go there all the time, and the more you dig, every single one of these categories that I'm talking about is mentioned. So it's funny because you can actually see people don't know why the hell there's a ghost, and so they're making up all these stories. The next category I'm going to talk about is kids. I have a caller calling on the line, and so I believe.
Awesome.
Excellent. Here we go.
To accept, press 1.
We have a caller on the line right now. Dave, is this you?
It is me, man. How you doing?
Excellent. How you doing tonight?
I am doing good. I'm going to be starting some sort of a paper, some sort of a petition going that we change The Shining into a documentary from a horror film. Because
I'm with you.
I'm starting to think that's real.
You know,
you've been on the money all night, by the way.
Well, thank you very much. The
ram tail was Peleg Walker.
Okay, I'm gonna have, if you can, let me do my little joke first, but then after that, you can totally. If you have details on that, I would love for you to share them.
Yeah, no problem.
Okay, so I don't know if it's a joke or just an observation, but the beauty of Stephen King is finding the horror in the normal, right? And so it makes complete sense that The Shining, stripped of any paranormal, stripped of any psychic things that are going on there, like, we are scared of being locked up and not being able to get out of someplace. And it's funny because you start to feel it before it even is a thing, right? So when they say, it's like a person with a cigarette, right? A person who smokes, you know exactly how many cigarettes you have left, right? And you start to freak out. You start to freak out, even if it's just like, okay, I know 10 hours from now I'm going to be out of cigarettes. It's the same kind of thing. Like here in Florida, I think tomorrow is when they're kind of closing things down. And even though you can completely do anything you want to do right now, the claustrophobia is already hitting you, you know?
Oh, yeah. No, you're right. I mean, just seeing the report every day, it's like something else is getting closed, something else is getting closed. And your world gets smaller and smaller and smaller. And
and then all of a sudden, weeks go by, and I was doing it today. I realized, like, wow, I haven't like hugged somebody who I didn't help create in like 3 weeks. You know what I'm saying? Like, it's kind of crazy to think.
That's huge for you, man. I mean, because you're not a hugger, right?
I'm not a hugger, but I miss it though. You know, like. So, Dave, tell the few people who listen to the show who don't know who you are.
Oh God, I'm Dave. Dave Francis. I'm from Upton, Massachusetts. Or if you don't know where that is, it's right next door to where they start the marathon up here in Massachusetts every year, Boston Marathon. I call it the armpit of Massachusetts because literally we're in the armpit of Massachusetts. You know where the Cape Bed is and stuff. I get into ghost hunting about 12 years ago, 13 years ago. I've always been into it, but kind of really get active with it, and I've been in and out for a while. Kind of getting back in again. And I've been helping out with the Tim show down there with the Bridgewater Triangle stuff every year. We like to get involved with that.
And I've been reposting your stuff. Was it You've Seen a Ghost Now? What?
Yes. I think I wanted to kind of start a project I could really get into, and that's the way I looked at it. I'm just a layman. I mean, I have so many people come to me and go, "You're the ghost guy, right? You're the ghost guy." After a while, I was like, "Okay, I guess I'm the ghost guy." And I started thinking about it, and it's, I'm probably in the same spot I was when I started this 13 years ago. I don't have any of my questions answered. I still don't know what's going on. And I think it'd be a fun way to kind of look at things, just kind of take a more of a middle of the road approach. I get jaded for a little while.
We all do, right?
Exactly.
Right.
And just to bring a little bit more fun to it, I think, and look at things from every perspective we can.
Excellent. So you can follow both that stuff, but if you're following my media, I push his stuff out every time I catch it when I'm not doing those 2 days without Facebook because of one reason or another. I always push his stuff out. So what's the story you've got for us tonight? Because you were one of the first people to jump on me like, I got something I gotta tell. So
Oh yeah, I got a few of them for you. Actually, you were just talking about the railroad tracks. Last fall, when we did the Bridgewater Triangle show, Mark, the paranormal pirate, he dragged me up to the abandoned tracks. Is that Easton?
Okay.
It's one of those towns down there. I think it's Easton. And
You talking about where they
sitting out on the
start?
power
Are
line.
you talking about where they started the T and then they ended, or
No, this is
Okay.
the old abandoned railroad that runs like behind the dog trap
Okay. Yep.
through the swamp.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd never been down there before. We hiked in, I'd say about a 3/4 of a mile and got to the power lines. We were sitting there. And at one point we heard this really weird noise, and I'll get past that. A few of us took a walk down the abandoned lines, left Mark sitting there, and walked a good another half mile. And on the way back, we were coming up, and we said, "Oh, there's Mark down there. We could see a light." And it was in the middle of the old tracks. There's trees on either side, and we're walking towards it. The guy that was with me, he was filming everything. So he ended up getting it on tape. Mark was another 250, 300 yards past that.
Oh wow.
And there was this yellow light swinging back and forth, moving a little bit here and there, here and there. And like you said, it looked like a lantern. That's the only way to describe it. It looked like someone carrying something.
Right. The physical
Like
thing that's going on
train.
makes sense to the story, right?
Yeah, it never got close to us. I mean, eventually it kind of just stopped, and then we realized there was no light. And then Mark's lights were completely different. All the new LEDs were all blue. It was the light we saw was like a yellow, orange. And that one was filmed, so that was really interesting.
Oh wow!
It didn't happen around the same time of year. I guess those lights always seem to be January or February or something,
right?
Where people see them. But I'll tell you, it was cold that night, so I mean, it was winter's conditions. So
not a lot of swamp gas exploding, is what you're saying?
Yeah, no. As a matter of fact, everything was pretty.
Right. No, I'm with you.
Yep.
And what's the other story that you wanted to share?
The first time I ever met Mark, I went down and met him. We got in his car, and he was taking me all around to all the places he had been visiting in the Triangle.
Uh-huh.
So we went to Lake Nipponicket, over to some of the cemeteries over in Rehoboth and stuff, and then we went to Anawan Rock and got out of the car. First time I'd ever been there. He was telling me some of the stories and stuff, and I'd read, a lot of the stuff you're writing and stuff like that, and I think everybody else has pretty much covered it. We get to the rock, and if you've been there before, right? You know, there's one path in,
yeah,
and then you kind of go to the right. And as we were at the base of the rock, as we got there, where I guess the seating there now, but there's like a little open area at the front. As we were making our way to the right, I was behind him, and I turned and looked to my left, and about an arm's distance away, there was a grapefruit-sized yellow ball of light between me and the tree. It was just sitting there, and it wasn't casting light on the tree.
Mm-hmm.
And as soon as I mentioned to Mark, hey, it like a bubble almost just gone.
Yeah. Let me ask you, how...
He turned and he went, what? And I said, there was a light there.
And it's hard because it's proportions, right? It's perspective, rather. But how big would you say that it was?
I'd say like a grapefruit.
Like a grapefruit.
Or a softball, at least.
Okay.
Yep. And we stopped for a split second. I showed him. I said, well, it was right there. There's the tree. It was between me and the tree. And, okay, he went to keep walking. I turned my head and looked back over, and it was there again. And the same thing, it repeated again. As soon as Mark stopped and went to turn, it was gone.
Wow.
And that was the first time I'd ever seen a light before. I'd never seen anything like that.
So the first thing is,
right there.
The first thing is you need to stop going out with Mark, right? Because that he seems to be the key to your ghost lights. But the other thing is, what I wanted to ask you is, Anawan Rock is famous for these ghost fires. I almost said the word that I can't pronounce. These ghost fires that are seen all around it. Is this something different than like a ghost fire that's seen there?
Oh, definitely. This was a ball of light.
This is a ball of light.
And I can't even say that it was a light because, like I said, there was no light being cast on it. I could see the tree behind it, and this ball was yellow. It was like a bright yellowish white. And there was no light cast on the tree at all or anything surrounding it. It was just hanging in space.
Yeah, and that's the other thing that I think...
That's
the other thing I think that I would love to get like Moniz's ideas on this or whatever, is that these balls of light, even the St. Elmo's fire, are balls of light. So how are explosions or something that is ignited being contained to a ball of light that can then move. That's why I have a trouble with the explanation. So even something like this, you're saying it was the size of a grapefruit, you know what I'm saying? Or it was like, at least 6 inches in diameter. How does that stay stationary if it's in a state of exploding, or if it's in a state of combustion? How's it not just bursting, right? Like, instead, it's actually holding its form.
Or making noise at the least. You think there'd be something happening there.
Right.
Like a crackling or something. I don't know.
That's true. That's true. Right. Like, that makes sense. That's something I'd even bring up, is the idea that these explosions, in theory, would create noise. And very rarely are these ghost lights accompanied by sounds that sound like explosions, so people can say, oh, that makes sense. I understand what electricity sounds like, or lightning, or an explosion. I'm not getting that. Mm-hmm. Excellent point. I totally didn't even think of that.
Yeah, and you were talking about the fires, too. Later that night, at the top of the rock, we had an experience that Moniz and Andrew Lake had where we were seeing the flickering of the lights underneath the canopy of the leaves. So coming from below, like a fire was burning, and there was no light source at all. We looked all around. There was some fireflies and things like that. But, I mean, fireflies don't really emit anything. They just kind of move around. Right. This was lighting up a whole section of the woods from underneath. Not very brightly, but enough where it looked like there was a fire burning.
Right, enough that you're definitely getting that sense that something weird or paranormal is going on, or there's a fire that's not supposed to be there, that's not giving off, once again, noise, not giving off external light. Like, it's not lighting up that area of the forest. It should be, if a fire is lit, kind of doing something that's, has that light going on to everywhere else. You know what I'm saying? And it doesn't do that in these ghost fire. I'm avoiding saying the P word because I always mispronounce it. My daughter makes fun of me constantly. Can you say the P word for me? Like the phantom. I always say phantom.
Phantasm?
I think the word is phantom, but I can't say it. So, while I've got you on the line, because Anawan Rock is an interesting part of this, because one of the other categories, I'll switch over to what one of the other categories is this idea of, and this is weird because this doesn't happen in Anawan Rock, but you think it would. The souls of other people. Like, it's the soul of someone which has been kind of compressed into this ball of light as energy. And it's the soul of someone who has died at that location, almost always harnessed by somebody. So it's interesting that at Anawan Rock, where you might expect there to be a pukwudgie, and with a pukwudgie, a Tai Paiwunka, which is the Wampanoag term for this trapped soul category of ghost light. Have you ever heard of either a Tai Paiwunka story or a pukwudgie story at Anawan Rock?
No, I'm not at Anawan. No. I've always heard, I think it was down at Freetown at the top of the ledges.
Right.
Yep, that's the only places I've ever heard it come from.
Yeah, isn't that interesting that this one place, I guess maybe because so many people go to Anawan Rock and pukwudgies don't like to be seen. So, but that is the second category, are these Tai Paiwunkas, these will-o'-the-wisps, these souls that are trapped there because they're being held by somebody to lure people in. That's the other kind of variation of it. So I'm using you as a segue to talk about the other categories. So you totally used you there.
While you're talking about that, at Tamarack Park I can't think of the lake now. It's over in Lakeville. We did it for Tim's show two years in a row.
Yeah.
Oh God, what's that lake that's over Assawarmson? That's where we had an experience at the back of the park, overlooking the swamp in the back. This is like a wooded area. Where both years we were there, we saw a ball of light that was actually interacting with us. We said, "Hey, can you come closer? Can you come closer?" Because I thought at first it was a hunter or somebody walking through the woods with a flashlight.
Yeah.
The way it was moving. Until this thing started to move around and come closer to us as we were asking it to come closer. We ended up going back last year just to try it out, and nothing happened. And we went out there, we didn't see it again. But that time was really interesting because, like, that was the first time I took into account all the things I've read that you put out there before, where these lights are, like, getting your attention and interacting, like, trying to get you to follow them. The second year I got brave enough where I walked out into the woods after. When I did it, it was gone. It just wasn't there.
You know, the only time I was brave enough to follow those lights that were luring me into the woods was when I didn't know enough to be scared. You know, it was before I had gotten into this. For those people who don't know the story, it was during my bachelor party, actually, and it was at Vale End Cemetery in Wilton, Mass., which is notorious for its puckwudgies. And once again, lured into the woods, and I didn't know enough to know that we should be scared until we were deep into the woods, and I was like, we need to leave. Something is luring us into the woods. Like, I finally was able to kind of catch on to that feeling that my gut was telling me. So,
yeah.
Well,
yeah,
very
no,
cool, brother.
I went far enough where I could stay in touch with people. Like the night that I went in, I wasn't going too far into the woods at all. Just for the fact I couldn't see anything. The Tamarack is pitch black down there. Yeah. It was weird.
And I'm pretty sure they do have puckwudgie sightings in that area as well. So, I mean, it would make sense that Taipai Wunkers or ghost lights would be seen there.
Yeah, yeah. It makes you wonder just in those regions where these legends are all connected. Because I always try to see if the Nipmuc had legends like that up here. They're kind of they keep it close to the, they keep it under the vest. They keep it close. Right. They don't let a lot of their legends that stuff out. So there isn't much really going around my area. And honestly, I've never had any experiences like that other than down that way. Yeah.
Well, excellent. Thank you very much. I appreciate you calling in, Dave.
No, anytime, man. Anytime. And you stay safe, and you and the kids enjoy the lockdown.
We're doing the best we can. We're doing the best we can, brother. Thank you very much.
All right. Hey, have a great night, man.
You too, man. That was Dave Francis. Yeah, so that's kind of the second category. Thank you very much, Dave, for coming on. That was the second category, are these lore ones. And the lore ones are the ones who are connected to another paranormal creature, right? So in this case, the paranormal creature is the puckwudgie, but there are other ones that use it as well. The third legend, almost always connected to these ghost lights, is the child. And these ones are kind of most famous in cemeteries. So almost always when you see a ghost light in a cemetery, it falls into either there's one little subvariant of it that's like the sentry, the person who's guarding the cemetery. And then the other bigger one almost always is the children. So this is something that I experienced in the two different cemeteries in Arcadia we've done, Coker Cemetery and Oak Ridge. I'm totally getting that name wrong. I can't believe I'm horrible with names today. Oak Ridge Cemetery, with the Lotts and the Richardsons. And I think that the nature of these ghost lights, it makes us feel as if it's kind of this perfect combination. The way that they act, especially in cemeteries, makes us feel as if they are children because they're playful. They move around. They interact, like Dave was saying. They skirt back and forth. It makes sense to us that they would be children, right? So if you take that idea and you combine it with the idea of how much we absolutely hate the fact that a child dies, and so it makes sense for us. We've talked about this a lot. This idea that children as ghosts makes sense because it's such a tragedy. It's something that we need to explain away. It's something that we hope that they would have life after death. Those two things combined for this third category. So you have something like in Coker and like in Oak Ridge where they play with each other, right? And so it makes us think like, oh, it's okay. These children are going to be okay because they found each other after death and they're playing. They play with the people who go there. They'll dart in and out of the headstones. And because of this, we assume that they're kids. And it makes complete sense because we want kids to have a life after death. We don't want we want that purity that they had to kind of go beyond their life. And so the tragedy of a child dying, and then we make up the backstory. So in the case of the Richardsons, you need a backstory. The murders actually happened, but the backstory is, they play with each other to comfort each other, and as opposed to the Lots, where you have this, even though it doesn't make sense, right? If you don't know what I'm talking about, you can look at our episodes on Coker. But these were the less than a year old, except for one, less than a year old spirits who were trapped in this cemetery, who are there because of a curse, who give people good luck. Let me tell you something. I've had nothing but bad luck since I've gone to Coker. And they play with you. They move around, and so there's that kind of child cemetery one. The last one I'm going to talk about, and we're actually almost out of time. I thought I would get into more actual stories. The other one, which is probably the largest category, is the traveler. It is the person who is stuck going from here to there. If you know me, you know I really kind of got my start exploring hitchhiker legends. And this is a variation of the hitchhiker legend, although they do the same thing, but we don't necessarily connect the two, right? Hitchhiker, you actually see the spirit. You might even stop the car. You might even get a ride. Think Resurrection Mary. Think Redheaded Hitchhiker, Route 44 near Anawan Rock, where Dave was talking about. But this idea that for one reason or another, and it could be a suicide, like at the Oviedo Lights. It could be an accident. It could be being lost. But this idea that someone needs to go from point A to point B, and because of their death, they can't. And so they are forced to walk this stretch of road and to be there forever, to never get to their location. And instead of being seen as a full-figured apparition like a hitchhiker, for those legends, it's seen as this ball of light. There are two reasons why this is the most popular of the categories. One, the story makes the most sense to us. It is the very definition of unfinished business. It is the very definition of something that would trap a spirit on the earth. It's the thing we fear the most. Imagine trying to get home to your family and you can't, right? So if legends are developed around the things that we fear, then something like not being able to get home to our family, not being able to find that peace, not being able to complete our journey, that's going to trap us here. That backstory makes sense. The other reason is whether it is physical, like scientifically explainable, natural phenomenon, car lights, it would make sense that stretches of road would have the most activity in the form of balls of light, right? Because you do have this reflection of headlights. You do have this, we don't necessarily understand the physics of the way the moon hits things. So there is a very natural reason for many of these things to happen on a stretch of road, right? Because things are happening on stretches of road. That's why they're roads, right? They take us from one place to another. It could be headlights. It could be reflections of things. The definition of a road is usually that it cuts into something, right? So if you think about roads, we as people destroy mountains to get through them with roads, right? They cut through the natural world, and all around that is nature just kind of looking to come in and reclaim itself, right? And so you have this idea that we are literally walking through one little path, one little stretch that we've carved out of nature. So it would make sense that natural and supernatural things would be chomping at the bit, would be the barbarians at the gate. Is that the expression? And so that these stories would develop. So if you take the very kind of natural idea of, you know, that unfinished business and those stories and the suicides and the love that can't connect, and or getting into a car accident on the way home, you connect it with a location that has that potentially natural stuff happening or supernatural stuff happening. Those two things dance with each other to form these great legends on these stretches of roads. So it makes sense to us, which is why we spread it. Those are also the ones that people are more likely to go out and see. So not only do you have that, the Oviedo Lights, if you go to the other coast, you then have the Ormond Beach lights, which are not seen anymore, but for a while were almost as popular as the Oviedo Lights. And it's got the same kind of backstory to it, except for it is almost wholly naked, wholly Native American in orientation. So it's got this whole thing of there were a whole bunch of people who were wiped out, and that's those lights are their souls still walking this path, looking for revenge and all that kind of good stuff, which, you know, is a lot more about the way that we treated the Timucua in that area than it is like any actual thing. We're actually out of time, so I'm probably going to have a Ghostlight live show too, just to get through all the stories, because we need to get going. So I want you to in the next few weeks or so get in contact with me about as many of